I was just told it's time. So, hi, I'm Matt Herper. I'm the editorial director of events here. Welcome to this amazing, amazing space. I hope you're all having an amazing JP Morgan and are not too hungover yet. A big thank you to our sponsors for making this evening possible. I just want to make sure the people in the back can hear. A big thank you to our sponsors for making this evening possible. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, Miram, and our supporting sponsor, Cencora. And with that, we are ready to get started. To kick things off, please welcome to the stage Stat's co-founder and executive editor, Rick Burke.
Hey, welcome everyone. Can we have a little quiet in the back? How do I hush people? Hey, is Angus around? Can you do your whistle? That whistle is, thank you, Angus, from our COO, Angus McCauley, who knows how to quiet a room. I just want to thank everyone for coming. This is such an incredible space and an incredible crowd. You guys must have special access because we ended up turning away hundreds of people, literally hundreds of people who wanted to be here with you tonight. And thank you for picking Stat, too, because we know you had a lot of other things you could have done tonight. I just want to briefly say a few things about Stat. We are entering, in November, we'll be 10 years old, believe it or not. And, our first day of publishing in November of 2015, our first big expose was on the vitamin business of a guy named Donald Trump. And that was well before anyone knew that Trump would even be the Republican nominee. And here we go again. But I'd like to think that initial story was sort of an example of what we try to do at Stat, and that is be prescient and ahead and thinking ahead about sort of what the next stories are, what our readers need to know. And we've done that just more recently with, we've for months been covering well before the election the Maha movement and what that would mean if Trump were elected. And I feel really good about sort of how we've led the coverage in many ways. We've led, I hate to say, I hope nothing happens bad with bird flu, but if it does, Helen Branswell has been on the case day after day, month after month, written more about the perils ahead than any other news organization. Of course, United Health, following, everyone's been talking about it after the horrible tragedy of December. We've been writing about United Health for more than 2 years. It's been the focus of our investigations, and there's more coming, but we've had a really incredible series this year, or last year now, 2024, called Healthcare's Colossus, that really went deep in penetrating United and the impact on the health of Americans. I want to then say, of course, our biggest central core coverage area is biotech. And I hope you all read our biotech coverage. How many of you get our readout newsletter every morning? That's just about everyone. Is there anyone who doesn't, and why not? Why don't you? So, and I don't know if you've noticed, but we have a special JPM edition that comes out later in the day. I'm all mixed up with my time zone, so I think it comes out like middle of the day. And the one today was just packed full of provocative, interesting stories and tidbits about what you need to know at JPM. From our team here, we have many reporters here, and we have all together, we have more than 20 people from Stat, from reporting to events to marketing to sales, because we obviously consider this, such an important gathering here. And I also feel like we bring, or at least we try to bring a lot of expertise to STAT. To JPM. I think the number one person, veteran of JPM from STAT is Adam Feuerstein, who says he's 21. This is your 21st? And Matt has gone not nearly as much because apparently Matt used to shy away from JPM. You were too good for us, right? So all told, if you combine the experience at JPM with all of our reporters who come, it's probably 100 years experience, 100 years of, no, 100, not 100 years, 100 JPMs. Is that fair to say? It sounds good, right? I also want to make sure you all are reading. Not only do you get the Read Out newsletter, our Read Out Loud podcast. Do you all listen to that every week? Raise your hand if you do. Well, if you're missing out, if you're at JPM and you don't listen to the Read Out Loud, it's hosted by Adam, Allison DeAngelis, and Elaine Chen, who are all here tonight. So, and they're doing a special edition live from here, or I don't know if it's live, but a special edition here, and it will feature a special interview with Eli Lilly CEO Dave Ricks. And so that'll be this week. So you should definitely tune in to the Read Out Loud. And speaking of newsletters, or speaking of biotech rather, I hope you all are subscribing to Adam's weekly biotech newsletter. Do you all know about this? Adam Feuerstein's biotech scorecard? Raise your hand if you read it. Okay, that's not as many as you read the readout. So I suggest you sign up. The reason to sign up is if you have any interest in biotech, which you do, you want to hear what Adam has to say, even if you don't agree with him. Often a lot of us don't agree with him, but you want to hear what he has to say. And Adam's newsletter holds the distinction of being the open rate, which is what we look at, how many people actually open the newsletter and read it, is like soars above the industry standard. Most people who get Adam's newsletter read it, and that's quite saying something. And finally, before I let you go, I want to talk about another newsletter we're starting next month. And it's called AI Prognosis, and it's going to be brought to you by health tech reporter Brittany Trang, and it's informally dubbed the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Healthcare AI Galaxy, and will be all the latest news you need to know about the intersection of healthcare and AI. And you can sign up on our site now for that. I highly recommend it. Again, thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. And let me now turn it back to Matt.
All right, and if you like this, check out one of our summits in New York, San Francisco, or Boston. You'll hear more later. Thanks again, Rick. And here from our presenting sponsor, please welcome to the stage John Arena, Interim President and SVP, Enterprise Strategy and Solutions, Global Pharma Services at Cencora.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. I guess first I'd like to ask to give it up to the STAT team for hosting us in this beautiful venue and all the work you've done to prepare for this. Thank you. So nice to meet everybody. I'm John Arena, as he said, and I work for Cencora, and I'm really excited about what we do, and I'm excited about innovation in medicine and the fact that all of us are committed to really impacting people's lives in a positive way. And it's a significant responsibility that we all have, and it's a hard responsibility. And innovations are continuing to come and break through, and investments are being made. Risk is being assumed in doing so, but the impact on people's lives and the ability to provide hope for those people is powerful. It's a great opportunity to be in an industry where we're purpose-driven in what we do every day. And what I just wanted to share a little bit about is the importance of choosing a strategic partner. It's difficult and it's hard to do what we do, and it's very difficult to do it alone. And at Cencora, what we've learned helping companies launch products globally for over 20 years and the investments we've made to scale our capabilities more broadly from a global perspective, but then across the value chain in this industry are significant and very intentional. And the first piece I would say is choosing any strategic partner, us or whomever else, is get them involved early. Get them involved early in the development phase of the drug, understanding the regulatory strategy, market access strategy, understanding the pricing strategy, understanding the support the patient's going to need when the drug actually becomes commercialized. So it's all knit together in a way to provide a positive patient experience and remove access barriers is critically important. The second piece is any strategic plan is ultimately going to have to be flexible and change based upon the turbulent environment we all live in. So having a partner that's going to evaluate the terrain, the landscape, understand what's happening, be intimately connected to the business, the brand, and the environment is really important because you're going to have to pivot and make decisions and changes to make sure that patients can get on drug as quickly as possible, mitigate patient abandonment, which is a tragedy when they're responding to a drug, and make sure that they're persistent and stay on their therapy so they can really reap and harvest the benefits of life-changing medicines. And the last thing I would say is, the importance of really understanding and stepping back to how we can get these patients in a position where the access barriers are removed, they stay on drug longer, we can continue to innovate, we can continue to build and expose them to new medications, and really manage this healthcare ecosystem in a way that's going to be great for the patients, great for business in totality, and really maximize the quality of care that we provide. Those are key elements from a partnership and some things that really take into consideration that we learn and we've continued to learn and adapt as we engage the industry. So I'm very proud about what we do. I'm very proud about where our industry is moving. It's challenging, but it's fun, and I think everybody here gets up every day to live for that challenge and make an impact on patients' lives. At Cencora, we want to really make healthier futures together, and we want to be a strategic partner in doing that with each and every one of you because we care about the patient, we care about what we do. We take it seriously, we don't take ourselves too seriously, but all I ask is invite us in, consider these things when you choose a strategic partner, and we will absolutely stand and lock arms with you in doing so. Thank you very much and have a great night.
All right, everybody, get ready. We're about to have a master class. Thank you, John. Here for our first editorial program of the evening, welcome to the stage, Joe Edelman, Chief Executive Officer and Portfolio Manager of Perceptive Advisors, and Stat Senior Writer for Biotech, Adam Feuerstein.
Hey, everyone. How are you? Nice crowd. Thank you so much for coming. Joe, thanks for being here. How many times I've asked you to be on stage with me? A bunch.
Have you?
I have, and you've always turned me down. So I'm happy that you finally said yes.
Yeah, you pressured me. I'll do it for you.
So Joe, I've called you a biotech investing legend. Tell the crowd why that is a well-deserved title.
Because I'm a billionaire, probably.
You are? That's true. Yes. But you didn't start your career as a billionaire.
Well,
so
the fund started in '99. For the first 20 years, it was a 30% annualized return. It's been tougher in the past few years, as it has been for a lot of people. But we've made a lot of money.
So assets under management now $7
the
billion?
hedge fund's about 3, but the total is about 9.
Mm-hmm.
We have credit funds. I think that's close to 6. We have a venture group, and we have a new discovery fund, which is structured finance. It's creative kind of solutions for financing companies. It looks quite good.
So obviously we come to this conference every year. It's in January. Can I get your mood check? Like, how are you feeling today about biotech? Obviously, we've had a tough few years in the biotech investing world. I wonder how you're feeling about, what's your mood right now?
Well, I feel very good about the stocks we're in.
Well, of course.
But
you only take the best stocks.
What you're seeing now, almost all of our positions are trading under their DCF value. We create long-term models, so it's relatively inexpensive. And I think it's a mix now. You've got, if you deliver, you get rewarded. You see that, a company like Argenix, obviously, has come up. But even if you produce very good data, you do get, the stocks do respond. At the same time, the industry as a whole burns a lot of money, and you have to think about what it is a biotech investment. What's it about? It's about answering three questions, and everything else is the perception of those issues in between. So one is, does the drug work? So that's answered by phase 3. That's a one-day thing. Will the drug be approved, which is the PDUFA date? And then will it sell enough to justify a higher price than what you paid for it? Getting all three right's difficult, and as I said, in between that's a perception of these things. What ideally I like to see...
Is that where the name of the... It's
that's the source
advisors.
of the name.
So that's the source of the name of the fund.
Perception reality. Yeah, because it's 99% perception. First, obviously, it's, will this drug work? Sometimes if people are all convinced it will work, of course, then you have to early on deal with, well, how big is the market really going to be? But if you have, if there's a fair amount of risk, you can take it step by step. So when you get a phase 3, if it's positive, the stock will respond. If a very conservative estimate of the sales justifies a higher price. So the ideal stock is one where we think the perception's going to be positive. Now, I don't buy stuff because I think the perception's positive, but we don't like it. I don't do that. But you kind of, sometimes you hit a story, you go, that's a good story. Everybody, Bezod's going to like it. All the professionals.
Let me ask you about that first question, does the drug work? Because I think, you've been in the business since the 1980s. You started the fund in 1999, right?
That's right.
The science has become massively complicated.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a credit to the fact that we've kind of figured out a lot of the biology. Science has become, when I started, I've been doing this 20 years, it's a whole different game. So for you, how to answer that fundamental question about will this drug work, which obviously is important from an investment perspective, how is figuring out the answer to that question changed for you and the fund?
Well, the science, maybe I should talk about objectivity. One thing I knew was that I didn't have the scientific background. I do a lot what you do very well, too. You look at the data, the actual clinical data, you say, this is BS because they're leaving out. It's a data dredge.
Your bullshit radar is finely tuned. Finely tuned.
Yeah. That stuff, but you could see it change because the market gets more efficient, there's more competition. The psychology, which I talk about in a minute, changed so that people, used to be that if there was positive news, people often weren't willing to chase the stock. I was always willing to chase it. I didn't have that problem because I knew that was, there's all these biases is the problem, like buy low and sell high. That's a useless concept. You don't want to think that way. You want to think, okay, if I buy it, it'll go higher. It doesn't matter, you could have owned it and sold it a long time ago, but I want to know if the opportunity, is there, and if it's, there are times when even though the stock's at a loss, you don't want to be hoping against hope. You can see how much more less biased the market is, because it used to be stocks would go, you probably, maybe a little bit above cash if the phase 3 failed. Now they go to half cash. Now they go right to where you can just subtract the burn rate.
That's it, right?
That's it. You go right there. You don't get, stocks will go crazy if the market's very large and people weren't convinced it would work. They can go up 200%.
Do you find it harder to, again, answering that fundamental question? I mean, obviously, you have to hire smart people. You got, maybe you got PhDs working for you now where you didn't have that before. Is it harder to get to that fundamental answer, will a drug work? And, when your guys come to you and you say, you're like, what the hell is this drug doing?
Harder than when I started? It's much harder.
Yeah.
It's much harder. And some things you just need to have the scientific background, like, I have to ask Adam Stone or Ellen, what's the vector copy number? I barely know what that is.
Oh, trust me, I'm with you on that.
The basic question is the same. Is it expressing enough protein to have a clinical impact? That's all I can.
But there's a lot of it, and I think, like I said, you're very good at this, and, I've learned to do it over the years, is sort of, when you can look at data, you can suss out the bullshit. You can suss out the red flags. You can see something and you say, maybe I don't understand all the super deep scientific context, but there's something not right here, or there is something, this is actually very good.
Yeah, and the people that work for me are very talented, and they have the background. And what I try to do is allow them to be objective. Now, let me say something about objectivity. The public investments and private investments are completely different things. Private investment, you could be biased. You just need to do the work up front, and then if you want to hope all you want, fine. You don't have an exit, right? So you do all the work, and hopefully it works out. Theoretically, in the public stocks, you can always change your mind. Now, we always try to go for the long term. It's like the Warren Buffett.
Yeah, because you're in your portfolio. I mean, you have a lot of stocks in your portfolio, but for your top holdings, I mean, it's a large part of the fund, like about
40%.
About 40% is in your top 10 stocks. So you're going deep in.
Yeah, fewer than that, really.
You're going deep in those stocks, deep conviction.
Yeah, pretty deep. Yeah, I mean. Our biggest position's about 10%, so it's a good-sized position. Company Verona, which we're very.
By the way, nothing here constitutes investment advice.
That's right. No,
disclaimer,
yeah, it does.
disclaimer.
That's you
Okay.
speaking. I'm giving advice.
Don't listen to anything that Joe says about investment advice.
So,
even though he's a billionaire.
But what's interesting in the public market is all these things are probabilities. The probability it works, probability prove the probability that the sales will justify a higher price. Those can shift as you learn new things, but they don't have to shift like dramatically. Hopefully they won't. But if we learn something, makes us a little uncomfortable, maybe I try to leave room for the analysts to bring their odds down a little. So the way you could express that in position sizes. So if you're 80% confident, maybe you're 10% position. But if you go to 70, maybe you take that to 8% or something. You need to, I think, you want to take advantage of the fact that you have some latitude to change. So that's, I think, the thing that I did the best is, for me, I was very objective, and I knew it would get harder. That I knew. For a long time, I was selling a lot of naked calls against. I figured this thing is going to stay in a band.
So you got a position, but you're trading around the position.
Well, I don't trade around, because don't forget, trading around implies that you're going to buy it low and then sell it higher. That's not the way I think. But I will adjust a bit depending on how bullish we are at the moment. But that's usually, I don't want to give the impression that's going to change every week. That's not. And then we always look in terms of a short term and a long term. The short term often is just perception if you don't have any major event. But the long term is what we're really looking for. And then if you get that thing that's going to, you've got a drug that works and is going to sell, well, then you have to hit that kind of hard.
I wonder. It seems like to me that you mentioned that good news stocks go up. I do feel like we're sort of in this market, and it's been this way for several years now, where stocks will trade just around catalysts, right? Like a clinical trial readout.
That's what people like to think.
Well, and I think a lot of people do think that, like that things,
Yeah,
and then they sell off. But you disagree with that.
This is a, if you're talking earlier stage companies, yeah, they can respond to a catalyst, but everybody knows that that's not the end of the story. So I like the analysts. We deal with catalysts. That's very important, obviously. I don't want to discount that. But we like to also have a view fairly early as to the commercial potential. Because that gives you, an idea, well, if this thing doubles and you're not, maybe you should take some off if you're not sure about the commercial potential. But anyway, it has, as I said before, used to be that if there was better than expected news, there would be many, many times better than expected. Like Amgen had 18 positive beats in a row. And I was a sell-side analyst at Prudential, and I remember writing a note saying, responding to one of my competitors who wrote his note on it. It said, "Expect a positive surprise." And I said, isn't this an oxymoron?
Right, exactly.
You can't expect a surprise. And sure enough, it stopped. Amgen was brilliant at that, by the way. They would call you up, and I wasn't necessarily a top analyst, and they'd beat you up. They say your numbers are too high. Your numbers. More people should do that. If they're in a position where they kept everybody, controlled enough that they could keep eating. So, but it went up for a long time. Every positive surprise, it would go up, and then the stock that I got kind of known for, the first one was a company that had a 5-minute age test. Do you remember this?
I do.
Cambridge Bio.
Cambridge, yeah.
Well, there was an
Back in the day.
interesting repeat negative surprise, because the two analysts covering it thought it would do $30 million in the first year. And luckily for me, I had written my master's thesis for business school on immunodiagnostics, and I knew this is an absurd idea. A 5-minute test for age is, first of all, nobody needs that. They're going to give you an answer after they confirm the result. But I came out and I said it would sell less than $1 million. So you had 30 million, you had me under $1 million. And I remember the first quarter was like 50,000. It was like nothing. And that's when I kind of realized repeating it, because I'm like, the analysts can't go from 30 million to 500,000. Either they won't admit that they're that off, but even if they know it, so they slashed their numbers. But that was an example where every quarter it would disappoint again and again. Anyway, that's the psychology. That's sometimes happens. We had that with Neurocrine. Adam Stone actually recognized that very early. That was the launch of Ingrezza. If you looked at the first month, you could just triple it, and it was like a big number. But you had to jump on that quick.
So how do you, you take these big positions? Obviously, you're well known. What do you think about biotech management teams these days? Like how much is that important to you? Like if you're going to have a huge position in your fund, like trusting the management team, and how often do they piss you off?
Those are two questions. They piss me off all the time.
Answer the pissing off question first.
Management is more important than I used to give it credit for, without naming names. But you can get a lot.
You can name names if you'd like.
That was a mistake. So, they're all important. And one of the ways management may be important, besides because analysts always like to look at the science independently, not listen to the management. But that's, you know, if they have good management, and that's hard to define, that's one sort of filter. Like, how'd they attract that person? That's, you know, a valid question. Like, if you've got a small company and you've got somebody really good, that person probably got multiple job offers. And hopefully they checked into it. So I think management, I think I used to not emphasize it quite enough.
My feeling is it used to be when you were a smaller fund. I remember times hearing you on conference calls. You used to get in the face of management publicly.
Oh,
maybe you do it
with Jim.
Maybe
Yeah,
you do it. Maybe you do it privately now.
I don't do that anymore.
So let me
I
ask you.
actually apologize to one.
You
CEO.
become soft in your old age. Is that what you're telling me?
Very soft. Yes.
So let's talk about shorting stocks.
Okay.
You still like it?
No.
Do you still like it? No.
You
still do it, though.
Young people like shorting stocks. That's Schadenfreude.
And why is that?
It's partly Schadenfreude. It's like, you know, people like to see other people suffer. When I say I don't like it, listen, it's an important part. We are a hedge fund. Nobody ever got really rich shorting stocks.
I was going to say, it's hard to make money doing it.
Jim, what's his name? Because he got...
Bianco?
Not Bianco. I forget his name. But there was a guy who had a big short fund, but he was paid as long as they underperformed.
Right. It is. People think that it's easy. It's not. It's hard to make. It's easy to find a short, but it's hard to make money in it, right?
It's hard, and you've always got you're always, ever since, I don't want to say it's like, I hate it. It's an interesting, analysis to say, I don't think this is going to work. But the memory of GameStop, most people, I probably got more affected than a lot of you. That was the only time I've seen anything that ugly.
Well, Cassava Sciences, like most recently, right? I mean,
What's
that was
that?
Cassava.
Cassava was, but that's a good example of how hard it is.
Right, exactly.
Because that thing, remember that thing went to 140. It went down, when it went to 10, I thought it was over.
But I think it's a good example of a company and a stock that was an obvious failure and a zero. But even knowing that that drug is a total zero, you making money shorting that stock was really hard.
Extremely hard. The negative interest rate, the borrow cost went through the roof. The thing, it was kind of impressive that when Remy and Lindsay left.
When they got fired, right, and
the
other guy got arrested.
The guy who did all the preclinical work.
Right.
I thought, okay, this stock's going to behave itself.
Right.
Maybe it'll get to 12. It was like $10.
And it went like 4 to 40.
30-something.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah.
And I was like, this is amazing. You had horrible news, and it's trading huge premium. In the end, they couldn't be saved because the drug didn't work. But, they get crowded. And
because I always say to people, like, I know how a story is going to end, or I feel like I have a reasonable confidence in a lot of these things where I know how the story ends. I just don't know how long it's going to take to get there. Like Cassava is a good example. Like, I knew what was going to happen when the phase 3 read out. It was not going to work.
I shouldn't be talking so much about what the hell.
I get you talking about your book.
First we were trying to analyze, could they get arrested in the next year? Mm-hmm. And we talked to all kinds of, DOJ experts, and you get all this stuff. That never happened. At the end, it was that poor guy Wang. It was the preclinical side, but that took forever. And so you had to think, because that catalyst might be the end of it, and then you wouldn't have another chance. Mm-hmm. But it did go all the way down to the phase 3, which, as you know, failed miserably. You were good on that, right?
I appreciate that.
On that.
Yeah.
And then Martin Shkreli got all
Yeah,
involved.
he got in there too. Yeah,
he got in there.
Yeah, he did get in there. But obviously, you haven't got the success that you are by shorting stocks. You've got it, obviously, by going long in stocks. I mean, what are some of the, give me a couple examples of the best investments you ever made.
The best investment?
Yeah, the ones that you're like most, if someone asks you, what are you most proud of investing in?
I don't know about most, those are two separate questions.
Maybe not most proud. What,
I'll give you the one
most
that
profitable.
made a lot of money.
Yeah, give me that one.
Acerta.
Acerta is a great one. Yes.
That was Wayne Rothbaum.
Quad Capital. Yeah.
Quad Capital. Wayne, I've worked with Wayne a long time. He doesn't do public stocks, but Wayne's an interesting guy because he would love to focus on one name.
He gets
and
very,
became
very
really obsessed with the BTK
Obsessed is a good word.
mechanism, and we this is all, there's a book for Blood and Money about this, but we were in pharmaceutics, and because I talked to you about repeat surprise, that if there's the slightest negative thing, I always said you have to reevaluate. Now, Wayne really took that seriously. There was one little thing with lymphocytosis. I don't even remember what it was. He's like, out, and this is, the stock went from 1.5 to 7 or something. And then, I don't know, a year later, 2 years later, it was bought for $272. So.
Right, sold to Ashes. No, who was it sold to? Acerta, who did they sell the company to? Was it?
Who what?
Who did they sell the company to? I forget.
They sold it to
AstraZeneca, right, thank you.
But, I moved on from, I'm like, that's a shame, yeah, but at least I made a little money.
You made more than a little money.
I'm talking pharmaceutics.
Oh, okay.
And, but, Wayne, to his credit, found a better BTK inhibitor. That's acalabrutinib.
Right.
And that thing, I think the first raise he did, it was $5 million. It might have been, I'm not sure, 3.5 years later, he sold it for $8 billion. So
yeah,
that's hard to beat.
Yeah, that's a really good book.
Oh,
you like the book?
I like the book.
For Blood Money?
Yeah.
I liked it.
Oh, yeah. It's a good book. Yeah, so that was, the return from the first raise was insane.
So what in the portfolio today is the next Acerta?
Well, the next Acerta is hard to find out.
This is not investment advice, again.
We're excited about several. I mentioned Verona, which is a COPD drug. I think is over a $2 billion peak drug and done a lot of commercial work.
And the launcher has been really strong.
It's been very strong. We're in 2 cell therapy companies. We're both Arcellx and Iovance, which is, Wayne's on the board of that. Cell therapy, I understand why people don't always gravitate, because it's a little scary, because the execution, you always worry what's going to go wrong, there's going to be this, but it can't be genericized. And it's many times the most effective type of therapy. We've seen that in multiple myeloma, you see that, right? You see that. So those two, company Rhythm, which is a rare disease company, and then I still we've owned this forever, Amicus.
Yeah, you have. That's been a really long position for you.
Well, it's a very well-run company. They're cash flow break even.
Rare disease.
They've got probably at peak over $2 a share in earnings power. It's a $9 stock, $10 stock. I think people have, maybe they got tired because it's been around a long time. Very good management, Brad Campbell, and that's just, if you look, how's this thing going to trade if they're doing $2 a share in earnings and they're still growing, maybe a little slower?
Yeah.
It should be $25 stock, $30 stock. So those are hard to find.
So we're running out of time, or we are over time, but my boss will kill me. Rick Burke will kill me if I don't ask you this question. Trump, good for biotech, bad for biotech, indifferent for biotech.
I think it's good. I think it's good.
Good.
But I'm a fairly conservative person. But but aside from that, if no other thing, look, they've always, he was unfortunately talking about we're going to bring the drug prices down to the same as Rwanda, whatever the hell he was saying. But he, with Lena Khan, just on FTC issues, he's more of a capitalist. So I think it's just a better, you know.
And you owned Intracellular, didn't you? Do you own any?
I own some Intracellular.
Sold today for almost $15 billion.
Yeah, I mean that was in major depression. That's the best data that's ever been
really
seen
good drug.
as an adjunct in major depression. So I think J&J actually made a good purchase there. But yeah, Trump, I think, particularly with you know FTC, if nothing else, but in general, I think it's
And
a little
FDA,
better.
Marty McCarry, if he comes in there, you're
He
all right
seems
with that?
okay to me, and I don't know that RFK, you know, he's a little scary, but I don't think he really can or even wants to change everything. You know, there's all these statutes. You can't just change a bureaucracy like that. I think you have Scott Gottlieb.
Yeah.
You can't, it's not going to like all of a sudden, oh, we can't approve new drugs. No, that's not going to happen. So I think I'm reasonably optimistic that the administration will be, and I think they're working on maybe even getting, you know, streamlining approvals a little bit. We'll see. They always talk about that.
Right.
But
There's some efforts to do some reform.
yeah. I think that's they're making an effort there.
All right. Thanks for being here. I
Yeah,
really appreciate
my
it. Was
pleasure.
it as bad as you thought it was going to be?
I didn't think it was going to be bad.
All right, good.
I just told you I never do.
All right, I appreciate it. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
All right.
And thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Joe. You guys like that? Yeah? Up next for a session with our presenting sponsor, please welcome to the stage Chris Peets, Chief Executive at Mirum, and Peter Radovich, President and Chief Operating Officer at Mirum.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Mirum you're an interesting story in a couple ways, and one really interesting part of the tale that you guys have, Chris, is that rare disease companies always say that they are putting the patient first. But you have an interesting story for how that was true. Tell us a little bit about how this company was founded.
Yeah, thanks. And it's got a couple of fun biotech twists in it, but I'll give the background. One thing that companies also always say, unfortunately, is got to remind you we're making forward-looking statements, so I'll point you to the SEC disclosures for full risk factors. But to get to the fun part, so Mirum was a company that we launched about 6 years ago, and give a lot of credit to our chairman, a guy named Mike Gray, for how this story got started. So several years back, he started a phase 2 company called Lumina with an idea of we're going to take a couple of interesting assets forward in cholestatic liver disease, launched a phase 2 program, drew the interest of a bigger company, and Shire acquired them, kind of a clean biotech investment and flip type story. A couple years later, he got such a connection to one of the patient groups called the Alagille Syndrome Alliance. He set up with some of the co-founders, set up a foundation and was at one of these fundraisers with them and actually saw firsthand like kids that were in the studies doing really well, and at the same time actually heard from Shire that they were deprioritizing the program. They had thought, Alagille syndrome is too small, below our thresholds in a portfolio review.
For those who don't remember, Shire was a rare disease company like Galaxia and Urgenza.
Yeah, exactly. So, we thought this would be a great home for the program. But turns out, it's kind of, I almost think of the opposite of what Adam and Joe were just talking about. It got buried under the BS of, portfolio thinking and kind of large company bureaucracy. So because of what was happening at the patient level, that's how Mirum came to be. It was from hearing from some of these families that, hey, they're talking about shutting the study down. Is there anything that can be done? And we formed a company around it and acquired the product from Shire. And fast forward now, it's approved in a couple indications. We've got more on the way, and have kind of launched a full rare disease company off of it.
Peter, what happened when the drug got approved? How'd you guys celebrate?
Well, it's hard to. I've had the fortunate, opportunity, multiple opportunities to be part of drug approvals, but when that moment comes, you're just so elated with joy. I actually suggested we all do burpees.
What year was this? This was
2021.
Yeah. So there wasn't really you weren't going to go out.
They were virtual burpees.
They were virtual burpees. So you did the burpees. What's been the tell folks about the financial story here. What happened next once?
Yeah, so we launched in the U.S. in late 2021, and as Chris mentioned, around the world, subsequently Europe, Canada, and other geographies now as well, and built a phenomenal team that has been able to bring this product to patients around the world, and a very efficient team too. In only 6 years since founding, we're heading towards on the order of $500 million in sales next year, and have done that in a very efficient way with a team of only around 300 employees.
Now, and that's with 2 drug in ultra orphan, really.
Yeah, well, we actually have Livmarli was developed and approved and initially launched by Mirum. We did a transaction with Travere about 1.5 years ago to acquire 2 of their ultra-rare bile acid replacement therapies that fit really well with our pediatric hepatology call point. So we have 3 commercial products.
So, I mean, one thing that's really interesting here is we were talking about a rare disease company finding these drugs too rare. You are making money. You have a good amount of revenue. Why do you think these assets tend to be ignored, even now, even after all the successful rare disease drugs that we've seen? Chris?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it just comes down to that insight of patient impact is where you find products that matter and then build a business model around it that you can deliver it efficiently. And that's part of, I think, what we've been able to accomplish here at Mirum is focus, finding things that fit together so you don't need to have a big team, and you can get products that actually impact and change lives out to patients. So a lot of it's just discipline and making sure that you're choosing therapies that actually work. It's kind of taking a different lens from how things were being talked about in the prior session.
So, what happens next? You've built a company with revenue. You're growing. What are your next steps for your portfolio for these compounds and what comes after that?
Yeah, so the big story coming up later this year is expanding into larger indications. So we have a potentially registrational study for PSC, primary sclerosing cholangitis. This is an adult liver indication. Really excited about, again, kind of coming back to understanding what's happening in this setting, where there have not been endpoints. Endpoints have been really challenging with FDA. No good serum marker. A lot of programs really haven't found their way. And we're using patient symptoms as an approval endpoint. So I've had discussions with FDA on using that as an outcome. So actually kind of going, once again, back to just what is going to make a patient's day better and use that as the endpoint for approval. So we have that study's on track to complete enrollment second half of this year, have data, and potentially file next year.
Wow. So that's some pretty rapid movement. Peter, what are your biggest, as you move forward, what are you being careful about? What do you want to make sure that the company hits?
I think smart growth and staying focused on patient impact. I think, as Chris said, that's how we got to this point. That's probably how Livmarli was overlooked. I mean, one of the interesting things about Livmarli, the primary endpoint that was used for registration and is the basis of marketing claims is pruritus. And that's people hear pruritus and they think, I had poison.
Doesn't sound like a big deal. It's just skin, right?
I had poison ivy once, Right.
I've been itchy.
And if you go talk to a parent or a patient with Alagille syndrome or PFIC, they'll tell you about how their child is literally itching their skin off, the crib sheets are bloody. That doesn't kind of come through often in the kind of top level press releases and presentations. And so that's what, as we go forward, making sure we're staying focused on impact. And I think that's staying close to the patients.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, the same, and that keeping that discipline. So I find that Mirum's entering a year where things are working really well. We have a commercial business that's throwing off cash. We're able to put it in some great drugs in the pipeline to reinvest it. And making sure that we keep discipline on everything else that we bring into the company. I'm looking at my BD team right now, actually, making sure that that we stay true to what make everything work so far, is that you get real patient impact from the products that we're working on.
All right. And so flash forward us 5 years. What's it look like?
Well, the 5-year vision that we talk about is stepping in to be the leader in rare disease. There's a gap that's been left for a rare disease product aggregator in the industry because of the dynamics of bigger companies don't want to deal with the smaller products, and understanding them takes a specialized regulatory and clinical eye. And we want to play that role. We want to be the company that finds some of these misunderstood rare disease products and brings them to patients.
And how do you avoid the pitfalls that there have been cases of rare disease companies going to ultra rare. It has happened. There were cases where companies that were very successful suddenly had a bunch of unsuccessful products. How do you make sure that you're targeting the right product?
Our team spends a lot of time making sure we understand the biology of the disease, and I think what we've found is if you can have a large effect size in almost any rare setting, the market will reward that. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about bringing medicines in that have the potential to have a big impact for patients. And then we think if we can put those kind of products in our commercial team's hands, they can take us forward to the next level of revenue with that profile.
It's a neat story. Any closing thought?
No, other than thanks for the time here, and we're really excited about everything Mirum's working on, and more to come. Big years ahead.
Thank you so much for being here. And
thanks, Matthew.
If you guys could just cross back over in front of me, as kind of awkward as it is. Thanks.
Thank you.
Give him a handshake for me, too.
I'm on it.
Up next to join me for a conversation on the future of the FDA and CMS and the next administration, please join me in welcoming Dr. Scott Gottlieb, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and Seema Verma, Executive Vice President and General Manager at Oracle Health and Life Sciences. Hey guys, welcome. So we were just hearing from Joe Edelman that RFK might not be able to have a big impact on a bunch of things, Scott. But you had said you went on TV, which you do a lot actually. My mom loves to watch you on TV.
First question is going to be about RFK. Really?
First question is going to be about RFK. Let's get out of the way. But you said on CNBC that RFK Jr. could cost lives as HHS secretary. I would assume that means that you would prefer he not become HHS secretary. Is that a fair statement?
That's right.
Yeah. I was hoping you could run us through exactly what it is that you think he could do on vaccines that would be damaging. I mean, there's not really a chance of unapproving MMR, is there? So what steps would someone take? I know we don't want to give a cookbook, or you probably don't want to give a cookbook, but on the other hand, I think it would be useful for people to know how one would go about actually reducing vaccine acceptance and penetrance from that purge.
Well, look, I don't need to worry about giving a cookbook, because I think the things that I would speculate about are obvious policy levers. I think most of the obvious ones would run through CDC. And remember, there's no separate statute that governs CDC. The authorities conferred to the CDC are actually vested with the secretary and then delegated to the CDC director. So it's different than FDA or CMS. CMS has an authorizing statute. FDA has an authorizing statute. CDC does not. So the secretary retains all the powers, delegates them to the CDC director. So I think you'll see efforts to do things like disband ACIP, try to get like-minded people, anti-vaxxers on ACIP who would potentially...
That's the vaccine committee at the CDC.
The Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices that advises CDC on immunization practices and makes recommendations about what should be included in the childhood immunization schedule. So if you took all the vaccines that are currently recommended by CDC and you moved them into the category that's called joint decision-making, which is a separate category that requires a joint decision between the physician and the patient as opposed to being recommended where it becomes part of the childhood immunization schedule and the school entrance requirements, that could put a lot of pressure on a lot of red states that are currently under pressure to do away with childhood immunization schedules at the state legislature level to say we no longer have the sort of imprimatur of CDC. You've basically taken away the cover. Right now they feel bound by CDC's recommendations. If you moved all the vaccines to that sort of softer standard, and Gardasil, for example, is a vaccine that's in the category of joint decision-making. It's not mandated. But obviously the MMR vaccine, DTaP, are recommended vaccines, and that doesn't automatically mean they go into the child immunization schedules. These are decisions made by states subject to state legislatures. But I think most states feel bound by those recommendations. You could tie reporting requirements to the Vaccine for Children's program, which vaccinates more than 50% of the children in this country, where you could say that you have to report, for example, perhaps the immigration status of children, or you have to report whether or not they were offered a religious exemption. That would put a lot of pressure on blue states not to take that money. You could try to relitigate which vaccines could be given in conjunction with each other and open that up to some speculation and debate, and maybe put some restrictions about which vaccines could be given in conjunction with each other, arguing that there isn't sufficient data to say this vaccine and this vaccine should be given at the same time. And the vaccine schedule, a lot of the things we do with the vaccine schedule in terms of when vaccines are delivered aren't things that have been carefully studied. A lot of it is to conform with the practice of medicine when pediatricians can bring patients back into the office. And so if you were to change that, I think that would put a lot of pressure on pediatricians, or make it harder for pediatricians to get patients back into the office to administer the vaccines on a regular schedule. These are all pretty obvious things. And you talk about the MMR vaccine. Back in the early 2000s when I was at FDA with Mark McClellan, Walden, who's now going in, Dr. Walden, who's now going in to be the CDC administrator, forced a vote before the advisory committee to require the components of the MMR vaccine to be decoupled. He effectively compelled FDA to require the manufacturers to reformulate the vaccines without a preservative. That's when we moved from the multi-dose vial for the MMR vaccine into the single-dose injections.
This was the removal of thimerosal.
That was to remove thimerosal, where there wasn't any evidence that there was a correlation between thimerosal and any untoward health effects.
In fact, autism cases went up after it was removed.
The net effect of that was to increase the cost of vaccines, probably reduce vaccination rates. I mean, people can argue whether they think it was a good or a bad idea to move towards single-dose vials away from the multi-dose vials, but you basically took all those multi-dose vials out of the market. It made it harder for certain clinics, for example, to deliver large volume of vaccines. And so these things have been already done. You could have a very direct impact if you're using if you have direct control of these tools.
So I wanted to get that out there fast because I wanted to set up the potential downsides here. But I wanted to pivot a bit before we go, and now that and obviously if we saw a decrease there, just to put this clearly, if there were a decrease in the percentage of people who got particularly something like measles vaccine, we would see more kids getting sick, and we would see serious outcomes and potential deaths.
Well, look, let's look at the MMR vaccine. There are states where the vaccination rate is as low as 70% for the MMR vaccine. There's about 10 states where it's between 85% and 90%. The rate of herd immunity is somewhere between 92 and 95%. So we're well below that in probably about 20 to 30 states. I don't know exact number offhand. I think if we were to see about another 5% decline in the states that are in the 80% range, you're going to start to see distributed outbreaks of measles. We were already seeing outbreaks of measles in this country, rising numbers of measles cases. We're seeing rising pertussis cases, but there is a tipping point, and no one knows exactly where that is, but most of the conventional wisdom is that if you get down to about 80% in a multitude of states, which we're not far away from right now, you would start to see more distributed outbreaks. And you know, the argument back, so when I went on CNBC and you talked about that, there was a rebuttal from RFK's folks. And if you read through the rebuttal, the essence of it was, there were two arguments in there. One was that I estimated the severity of measles. I said the case fatality rate was 1 in 1,000. That's well established. And the argument back was measles isn't that bad of a disease, and I dramatically overestimated the impact on children, and the MMR vaccine doesn't work anyway. And so those are the two arguments. Measles isn't that bad, and the MMR vaccine doesn't work anyway. And I think they're pretty unabashed about those arguments. RFK's people, he's made them for many years, and so if you agree with that, then you disagree with me. But if you believe that the case fatality rate of measles is about 1 in 1,000, measles is a terrible disease. We don't want to see distributed outbreaks in children. It causes congenital measles, where babies are born with terrible deformities. And the MMR vaccine is highly effective, then you'd be concerned.
So that sets up a downside pretty clearly. But Seema, I'm talking to both of you. I wanted to zoom back a bit because I've heard both of you speak about your experiences with President Trump as someone who was actually very engaged with a lot of parts of health policy. So what are you hoping for in this next administration, Seema?
Well, look, there's a lot of places that we can go, but I would say generally, I think one of the things that was sort of misunderstood about the president and his focus on healthcare was that I think he actually very deeply believed that people should have access to high-quality healthcare. He was always very concerned about the cost of healthcare and what it was costing Americans. You know, how do we get the deductibles down? How do we get this cost sharing down? So very deeply concerned. So I think his focus also on drug pricing was sort of came from that, you know, that this needs to be more affordable for the country. I think in a second term, right, I mean, this is more of a legacy. They're unencumbered by, you know, maybe some of the political factors that you have in a first term. And I think his victory was decisive. And so, you know, I think they're not going to hesitate, honestly, to address some of those core issues. So I think you're going to see maybe even a bolder initiatives on their end. There's a lot of problems and issues in healthcare, right? So we kind of figure out where do you go, what do you do? And we look at Medicare. Medicare in particular, I think they're going to look for opportunities to create savings, but I think he'll be very focused on protecting the program for seniors, right? So protecting that impact and what the end user or the end beneficiary feels. But there's so many issues, whether we look at, you know, if we kind of go from the spectrum and just look at, I'll just stick to my CMS issues from Medicaid, right? Looking at eligibility and program integrity. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure for CMS and for the entire administration to kind of think about the DOGE agenda, right? And so how do we
That's
make sure
Elon and Vivek, the Department of Governmental Efficiency.
Right, and obviously, you know, Medicare, Medicaid, and CMS in general is such a large expenditure that they're going to have to look at what they can do there. So I think it's going to be a challenge. So they'll have this pressure to address, you know, how do we reduce expenditures at the same time trying to figure out how do we protect care for beneficiaries. And I do think the president feels pretty deeply about that and has been very clear that he wants to protect the program. So they're going to have to find these balances and finding issues, whether it's site-neutral payments, things that they can do where, you know, it may have an impact to providers, but that maybe the beneficiary doesn't feel. So we think about like site-neutral payments is a great example, where we did make some changes in the first administration around that. And actually the impact to the beneficiaries, they had lower cost sharing. And so even if you think about, he could go further on drug pricing and try to address some of the issues there, that may actually have the impact of beneficiaries having lower costs as well. So I think that's probably where they're going to go and focus. But I mean, if you look at the CMS portfolio, right, from drug pricing to Medicaid to Medicare, it's pretty vast. I also think that in terms of pushing savings and getting real reform, you'll see a lot more focus on value-based care. I don't see how they don't do that, because that kind of addresses some, a lot of underlying issues in terms of focusing on health and driving better quality and outcomes.
Before I ask this next question, I'm going to disclose that Scott is on the board of Pfizer, which I think everyone in this room probably knows, which does make a childhood vaccine, and also when I get to these drug pricing questions, they're kind of important, and Seema works at Oracle, so which will relate to some of the later questions that I'm going to ask. Do we think that PBMs are really are on the radar? It does seem like there's a lot of noise around potentially. The president keeps talking about the middlemen, and that's what we're talking about. So do we expect action on changing how that structure works?
Yeah, I think he definitely he's pretty clear. I mean, what you're hearing is exactly how he feels about it. I think that there was, we considered a lot of actions around PBMs and the rebates. Those were widely discussed. At that time, the concern was some of the action with PBMs, that if you made some of these changes, made changes around the rules around rebates, that it could have the impact of actually raising premiums. And so that's, at that time, it was some concern about taking that policy action. But I do think that is an area of where they're going to go. It's an easy target. It's something that he understands. It's a middleman. People don't quite understand where the dollars are coming. There's definitely been some efforts around increasing transparency, and once people understand where the dollars are going, there may be some pushback to limit how PBMs are operating. So I think that's a fair assumption. I would be surprised if we didn't see some action there.
Yeah, and the House is talking about including the PBM provisions that got stripped out of the reconciliation or the end of the year CR package into the reconciliation bill that they do. That was, if you look at that PBM legislation of the 1,500 pages, I guess Musk got stripped down to 350 pages. About 1,000 of it was that PBM bill. So I think that's going to get put back in. I think the Republicans are fairly committed to that. I think this whole PBM, I think the whole effort by the drug industry to target the PBMs has been a very big tactical mistake by the drug industry. I've said that before. I think that there was a perception on Capitol Hill for years that the PBMs helped negotiate lower prices, and they did, and they created market concentration that extracted discounts from the drug makers. And I think by targeting the PBMs and creating this perception that they were corrupt, and there certainly were excesses in the industry, and it could be subject to a lot of reform. I'm not trying to be an apologist for the PBMs, but I think creating that perception that the PBMs were sort of this corrupt entity functioning as middlemen and just skimming off the system, it prompted a lot of policymakers, when you talk to them privately, to say, look, we can't trust the drug makers, we can't trust the PBMs like we thought we could, so we just have to impose price controls. There's nobody left in the marketplace to provide discipline. So I think from a long-term tactical effort, this has been a mistake.
Okay.
Well, it created a little bit of chaos, right? Because I think it made it confusing for the lawmakers, so it wasn't clear exactly where to go and exactly what to do. And even though they wanted to point to premiums, or when they wanted to point to PBMs, when you do the analysis, a lot of the work that the PBMs do actually keeps down the premiums. And that was when we were looking at the issue, that was always the dilemma. Well, yes, you can try to restrict what they do. You can try to restrict where some of these rebates are going, but at the end of the day, the impact would be an increased premium on seniors.
Medicare Advantage has long been a Republican darling, but it seemed like before the election, it seemed like it might be coming to be on the table. Is it still on the table? Is it something that these folks that the Doge folks are going to look at?
I think with any program, right, you got to make some tweaks, and you got to make some changes, and over time, you got to clean up the program. So obviously, there's, with the data that's coming out, there's definitely, I think, a need. I mean, whoever's sitting there, right? I think that's even bipartisan to say maybe we should look at how do we reform the program. There's some unintended consequences of the program. I don't think it's not a question of legality. Sometimes the rules permit some of the behaviors that we are seeing. But especially if you're looking at this in terms of looking for savings, then that's a good place to go. And not savings around benefits necessarily, but even just cleaning up some of the issues that we're seeing around risk adjustment, that could create savings as well. And just greater program integrity generally. I think it's a natural place for them to go.
I think there's a lot of questions about what DOGE is actually going to do, because if they function like an agency, and they've already named themselves a department, which probably was unwise, I think that I would surmise that they don't want to be FACA compliant. They don't want to have to be adherent to all the federal disclosure rules and the record-keeping requirements and the divestiture requirements. And so they have to function in that regard as sort of an independent advisory body in some fashion. There's a story out tonight in the New York Times that Elon Musk is looking to be a special government employee in SGE, which would require him to submit to all the conflict of interest rules. And those are very onerous. You don't have to divest as an SGE, but you have to submit to all the conflict of interest rules, and he couldn't be party to any efforts, anything that could potentially conflict with some of his private business's interests. So those are pretty onerous. So if in fact they try to function independent enough that they don't become FACA, that they're not subject to a lot of the divestiture and disclosure and record-keeping requirements, it probably hews in the direction of being more a body that makes recommendations around regulatory reform rather than actually trying to make reforms or changes to programs, because you could make recommendations around regulatory changes you want and be independent enough of the actual regulatory agencies.
Let's switch a little bit, Seema, from your old job to your current one. What are the risks as we look into regulation of AI here? A Trump administration is probably better for regulation of medical AI, I think, in your mind. But explain why, explain what's at stake, and I want to hear Scott's take on this too.
So if I look at this from a very broad macro level, when it comes to healthcare, right, we continue to spend more money, we continue to have poor outcomes, if you think about it, the population is living longer, that's a good thing, but as people live longer, they have more healthcare issues. And quite frankly, I don't think we've anticipated this. We don't necessarily have the workforce to take care of of the people living longer. Our providers on the front lines are very burnt out. We're spending 25 to 30% of our healthcare dollar on administrative costs. And despite all of these investments that we're making in healthcare, we have pretty poor health outcomes. And there are no big silver bullets where you look at it and say, if we did this, things would be better. From my purview now, working all over the world now with health systems, these problems are not unique to the United States. So it's not just because it's a single-payer system or government-run system versus a public or a private system. These are problems that are happening all over the world. So when I look at how do we solve this, how do we meaningfully solve these issues, and we're spending so much money on healthcare that it diverts our ability to put dollars into other things like national security, infrastructure, education. If you look at every state budget in the United States, one of their number one expenditures is the Medicaid program. And that issue is going to get even harder as we have more people living longer, going into nursing homes, and the states are usually who's paying for the nursing homes. It's incredibly expensive. So if you look at the trajectory, we're spending a lot now, we're going to spend even more. So we have to come up with solutions. And when I look at AI, I think, look, this is something that it's not going to solve every single problem, but it's certainly going to play a very big role. It's very easy to say, okay, it's AI, a lot of the, routine, mundane tasks that we all, that are in healthcare. We can use that, whether it's around coding, whether it's around billing, whether it's around prior authorizations. There's a lot of opportunity there to reduce our administrative costs. So there's a strong potential. And I don't think anybody disagrees on that. I think where it starts to become more gray is, okay, how are we using this with clinical decision support, and how are we helping providers on the front lines? And you can imagine, for providers on the front lines, there's so much data and there's so much information. I think that's what's also leading to the inequities that we have and the differences in quality of care.
Well, over and under regulation are a risk here. If you over-regulate,
Right.
you don't get
Right, you don't get
anything.
the benefit, right?
If you under-regulate, you may get fraud. So there's got to be some kind of
Well, I think it's if you under-regulate, there's also potential safety issues. So I can understand from a regulator standpoint that they want to be careful about this. What I get concerned about is if they over-rotate and they want to look at everything, that they may really thwart innovation and thwart the ability of the healthcare system to take advantage of what AI can offer. So it's tough. I think one of the things we also have to look at is how is AI being used and who is it being used by? Where is the human in the loop? And how do we kind of set up those parameters? But I am very concerned that they over-rotate. And if they over-rotate on this, I think they have the ability to really thwart innovation, investment, and then what are we doing to solve some of the problems that we have in healthcare? What are the other solutions? Because a lot of what we're talking about, whether it's Medicare Advantage, whether it's PBMs, we're talking about a lot of dollars in investment. And the problem is we're spending a lot of money, and how are we addressing the underlying issues, and how are we solving that problem? And today, I don't really see a lot of solutions out there. I think AI is going to play that role. So if they over-regulate, they're also losing an incredible and powerful lever to solve some of the problems that we have in healthcare.
I think where you could see a touch point, an early touch point would be to pull back the guidance that FDA issued on clinical decision support software, which was a revision to a guidance that was issued when I was at the agency, which embedded in a lot of additional requirements that make it hard to deploy AI tools in the delivery system as sort of supportive tools towards physician decision making. So for example, in the revised guidance, they say that if you have an AI tool that is providing recommendations to the physician is still in the loop, but the recommendations come at points in time where the physician is not going to have sufficient time to do an independent adjudication, so it's a time-sensitive clinical decision that has to get made. Well, that becomes a medical device. And so they've applied all these different attributes that, when you boil them down, make it very hard to deploy AI tools on top of information systems like EMRs to help support clinical decision making, where I think the tools can be most effective at providing greater efficiency, greater guidance to providers, a broader range of differential diagnoses that providers should be considering that they may not have insight into because they can't see across the kind of information that a lot of these systems can. Another requirement FDA is imposing is they're arguing that if information is drawn from multiple different streams, then that also becomes a medical device subject to FDA regulation. So you can think of an AI tool sitting within an EMR that's looking at imaging, looking at clinical diagnostics, reading through the provider notes. If it's drawing from all those three different streams of information, helping to synthesize it and provide unique insights, that would be a medical device. That's not what was intended when we wrote the draft guidance back in 2018. So I think that's something that could get pulled back right away.
Scott, you said something else there that I want to touch on, which is completely unrelated to AI, but you talked about guidances from when you were running FDA that are having an impact now. And one of the things that's striking about both of you is you were both well-known policy experts when you took these jobs, and you knew how these systems work. Scott, in particular, you really knew how the FDA worked. You knew every lever to push as soon as you got there. It was notable. That is not true of all of the people we are seeing in the health sector in this administration. Do we think that how quickly is this new administration going to be able to move? You have, on the one hand, a willingness to really do a lot, and both in terms of the president and a lot of the new prospective appointees. Is there going to be the expertise to get it done, to know where those levers are pulled?
Well, look, when you go into these jobs, you're going to be drawing upon the expertise of the professional staff, and you need to go in with a degree of humility and respect for the agencies and the people who work there. I think what you do when you go in is you articulate a vision for the things that you want to work on and why you want to advance those goals and how they conform with the mission of the agency, so that people can buy into your vision. And then you work collaboratively with the professional staff, the senior leadership, to try to surface ideas that they want to work on, they may already be working on, and you help try to expedite and elevate those things. That's how you get some early wins on the board. You know, a lot of the policies that we promulgated when I got to FDA within those first 6 months weren't policies that were de novo. They were things that were in process, maybe weren't getting sufficient attention, maybe weren't being advanced, didn't conform with the policy ethos of the old administration, but conformed with ours. And that was true of what we did on when we implemented that drug competition action plan, where we promulgated a whole series of guidances early on that tried to close loopholes that branded companies were exploiting to try to forestall generic competition, where we believed Congress intended for there to be generic competition. I didn't come in with those guidances drafted. I didn't draft them in my front office. Those were things that the generic drug division either was working on or wanted to be working on. And when we came in and said, look, we want to advance this as a matter of policy, this is important to me, suddenly it was, they surfaced all these good ideas. And so that's why it's important to go in and work very collaboratively with professional staff. They have a lot of good ideas.
It sounds almost like being a good editor.
The ideas that the policies that you implement that are more organic to you as the leadership of the agency, those take longer, because it takes a long time to try to draft guidances, issue things in regulation. You can make announcements about what you intend to do. I tried not to do that. I tried to make announcements about what we intended to do when we were far enough along that I felt confident we were going to actually be able to implement it, because you don't want to subject yourself to the attacks when you haven't even gotten your policy advanced.
I actually want to ask this a little differently. Do you have any advice for the next administrator of CMS, who may very well likely be Dr. Oz, just to remind everyone?
So,
It will be Dr. Oz.
It probably will.
He will get confirmed.
I mean, yeah.
so I think a couple things. I mean, one, you come into the agency and there's no way that anybody going in, I do think Scott was very well prepared, and was a good friend and gave good counsel. But for me, I didn't know everything. I definitely had some expertise in some areas. But if you think about what these agencies do, and I can just speak to CMS, it's so vast. There's nobody that's going to go into that job and know every single policy area. And even though you may be an expert in some areas, there's going to be things that come up that you don't know about. And you may go in there with an agenda of things that you want to get done, that you want to get accomplished. There's going to be things that the White House wants you to do. There may be things that a law passes or Congress wants you to do. And then there's things that just happen like COVID, right? Where there isn't a playbook and there isn't, this is what you need to do. Something's changed. So my point is that nobody's going to go into this being completely prepared. But I think Scott's right that when I went to CMS, I think that the career staff wanted to know, well, what are your priorities and what do you want to get accomplished? And a lot of it is laying out to them what your goals are and working with them, and they will help you figure out how to get that done. So I do think you have to have that collaborative relationship. And if you think about it in terms of these political appointees generally, if you look at the number of employees at CMS, it's around 6,000. Well, there's only 12, 15 political employees. So the work and these pages of regulations, that's being done by the career staff. So I think that the agencies themselves are very attuned to taking the priorities, or it could be something that's passed by Congress and they know how to implement that and how to get that done. I also think that, the administration, from my understanding, there's going to be a combination of people that have worked in government, and then there's people that are new to government. And I think the combination works well. It also works well to have people that I think there's something to be said about having folks that come from outside government, that have more experience in the private sector, that have been, Dr. Oz, he's a physician. He was practicing up to 2 years ago. This is somebody that's been on the front lines of healthcare, and I think it's very powerful to have people like that also identifying what the priority issues are. The other thing with the careers, while I think they're technical experts, at some point, some of these individuals have been in the agency for 20, 30 years, and they've also lost touch with what's going on the front line. So the combination of having people from the private sector that are working in the healthcare industry and combined with the agency's technical expertise on how to get the regulatory machine going can be very powerful.
I think Oz and Marty at FDA have been very sophisticated about what we've seen in terms of how they've gone about trying to staff those agencies, people who are going to be landing in the senior roles. So I think that they're going to be highly effective. I think they understand what the challenges are and how to be effective in these organizations, and so I'm very optimistic.
All right. Well, thank you very much, guys. This has been fantastic. It's a lot of fun sitting with you. For our last session, I'm very excited to welcome to the stage Dr. Meena Seshamani, the former Deputy Administrator and Director, Center for Medicare at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and Bob Herman, Business of Healthcare Reporter at STAT, and to moderate, Rick Burke, Co-Founder and Executive Editor, STAT.
Thank you both. I look forward to this this conversation because you both come at it from totally different perspectives, obviously, which is really valuable. Let me start with the news. Start with Bob. Bob has covered United Health as part of a team, probably more than any other reporters anywhere. You and Casey Ross did a series in 2023, Denied by AI. You and a team have been writing all last year about United Healthcare's colossus. Today you had a story in Stat, Bob, that 11 big healthcare companies dropped out of JPM, including Cigna and Walgreens. What's going on there?
Well, it was kind of shocking and not shocking to see some of the companies pull out. I think, given the events that happened last month, there has been, we can see it around here, there's been heightened security. And so, especially from the health insurance side, we saw Cigna and Centene, they were scheduled to come in December, and then they've since pulled out. I think there's concerns, given what happened in New York City in December to United Healthcare's CEO. So it's not surprising from that point of view, but there's virtually no major health insurance discussion at JPM now this year. And I know JPM is known as a biotech conference, but it really has always been a lot more than that. I come at it from hospitals and payers. They've always been here, or at least most of the big ones. CVS, Humana, Centene, Cigna. A lot of them have always been here, and for there to be no presence, it takes away from part of the discussion. So, but obviously, it was complicated by what happened last month.
And is there anything, just given your years of delving into United, just any perspective that you just want to share that people may not know about the company?
Yeah. Well, and this probably should go without saying, but like what happened last month in New York, nobody condones. And I know there was a lot of social media outpouring that we saw, and it was pretty cruel, and nobody condones that. However, I think for anyone who has been covering healthcare over the past decade, and you weren't surprised, if you were surprised by some of the resentment that the public had, if you were surprised by that, you might have had your head in the sand a little bit, because over the years, I'll just get unsolicited emails from people saying, I couldn't get this care, I have this hospital bill, I don't know how to pay for it, I can't get my drugs. This happens all the time. And it galvanized after the tragedy, and it caught some people off guard, but this has just been simmering under the surface for a long time. In regards to United, I know they get a lot of heat for being this health insurance company that denies care. Newsflash, all insurance companies do it. But what makes United different, and this is so important, they're much more than an insurance company now. A lot of the payers are. They're also providers of care. They are technology vendors. They help everyone get paid. It's this vertical consolidation that has just routinely happened over the past 15 years, and United has done it at a scale that nobody else has done. So that's what makes them different. This evolution, I think, is a little, not enough people are aware of it, at least when it comes to United.
Thanks. Mina, let me turn to you. With all the extraordinary public interest now, especially now in healthcare and how people are treated, what can you tell us about Medicare, what you've done, how the system is set up to help people, and what you might be able to tell people here that they might not know about what you've done with the agency?
Yeah, well, I think at the end of the day, healthcare is very complex and it's very personal. And I think that combination means that for those of us who work in healthcare, it behooves us to keep the people that we are serving at the center of everything that we do. And for me, I'm a physician. I was taking care of patients until I came in to lead the Medicare program, and it was very important to me, and it continues to be very important to the Medicare team that we're really focusing on people and engaging all aspects of the healthcare system, because the system's complex and the problems are complex, and the only way to really address them is by engaging everyone in the solution. And so I think the work that we had done around transforming care, so that now Medicare for the first time is paying for community health services, paying for care navigation for people with serious illness, right? These are paying for training for family caregivers as our country ages and more people are getting care in the home. What are the areas that really impact people's health and well-being that the healthcare system traditionally was not acknowledging, recognizing, paying for, to really try to make those changes? I think similarly with implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act, a big focus, for example, with drug negotiation was, what benefit do these drugs provide to real people in their real lives, in their communities? Again, so that you can move things from, the wonky, data of safety and FDA approvals to what it really means for people on the ground. And I think similarly, the improvements to Medicare Advantage really stemmed from conversations that we had with health plans, with providers, with people in those programs, to be able to address, for example, misleading marketing practices. That, these are areas that are, there's no winning there. If somebody, gets switched from one plan to another without realizing it, if they lose access to their doctor, that compromises that person's health, the provider gets frustrated, and the health plan also ends up, not being in a good situation. And so really trying to think about those areas of, common goals so that we can make sure that the system continues to move towards improvements for the people that it's serving.
Can I ask a quick follow-up? Mina's often the face of Medicare, but you were a practicing physician, and I'm curious, when you were in clinic, what were the biggest concerns that patients had, whether it be financial, clinical, and just tie it back to kind of the moment that people have frustrations over?
Yeah, I would say I definitely brought my patient stories with me to this role. There was one woman who, I'm an ear, nose, and throat physician, and she was on Medicare, and I had to prescribe different antibiotics for an ear infection that would not resolve. And literally, we would get on our smartphones and look on GoodRx so that I could try to prescribe something that she would actually be able to fill. So what an incredible change that now there's a $2,000 out-of-pocket cap for out-of-pocket prescription drugs. And, I wish I could go and tell her, hey, now you don't have to worry. We estimate that 11 million beneficiaries will benefit from this, and those who don't have other financial assistance will save $1,100 a year. The insulin, I ran our diabetes care management program, and there were patients who rationed their insulin and ended up, bouncing in and out of the hospital, and now there's a $35 insulin cap. And also the work that we did to integrate behavioral health with primary care. Again, with diabetes, we found that 2/3 of the people with diabetes who were getting readmitted to the hospital frequently had a behavioral health issue. Because you can talk to someone about taking their insulin and taking their medications and exercising and eating healthy, and if they're depressed and anxious and can't get out of bed, are you really helping them? And so it was really important to me, and I think it's been very important to the Medicare team, that the program and the healthcare system shouldn't just be about treating a diagnostic code. It should be about caring for people, because we are all greater than the sum of our diagnostic codes.
Are you, what's your thinking about when you talk about the progress you've made, but also the complexities in the system? The last panel talked about the new team coming in. Are you concerned that some of this progress will be stunted, that it could be, what you've done could be undone?
I mean, I think that what we have done has very much been with engaging everyone in the ecosystem, utilizing data, getting comments from people, holding meetings. I mean, one of the favorite parts of my job was traveling the country and talking to people who rely on Medicare, family members of people with Medicare, talking to health plans, talking to providers. And, obviously with complex issues, there are always going to be multiple ways to try to approach a problem. And I think the key is approaching things with an open mind, using data, really engaging everyone collaboratively as we continue to iterate on these issues.
Are you confident that this open-mindedness will go to the next administration? In the last panel they talked about the Elon Musk and the cuts in the budget and so forth. Does that worry you, or do you think things will be okay?
I mean, I don't think that I have a crystal ball and can predict, but what I can say is that I do think that that is the foundation for not only good policy making, but also for good operations, right? I mean, Medicare is the nation's largest payer. We pay more than $1 trillion in claims. We partner with more than 1 million clinicians, 6,000 hospitals. And so it is really incumbent on anybody who is in that kind of role, and anybody who is leading a team of more than 1,000 people, more than 10,000 contractors, that you are approaching things in a thoughtful manner. And markets are dynamic. Clinical situations are constantly evolving. And so there is not a one-size-fits-all. And it's not, well, what was done now should be set in stone. Because if you do that, then you're not going to have the agility that's needed for the continued changes that are occurring in our healthcare markets, in the health of our population.
Let me ask you, Bob, about the agility. Do you see it? What are you going to be looking for in the next administration?
Well, I know Scott and Seema talked about Dr. Oz taking the reins of administrator, and I think there's a lot to report on him. I mean, it's another TV personality. I honestly have no idea how he's going to run a bureaucracy. And to be fair, anyone entering the position, you too, Mina, probably had no idea what you were really getting into. I'm sure it was fun. But one thing we do know is he did, for example, use his show to advertise and advocate for Medicare Advantage plans. I think there's a pretty clear skew that Dr. Oz supports them. I don't know what that means in practice. I would imagine, just based on that, could it lead to friendlier MA policies? And this is, I guess, a question for Mina. Out of all the Medicare policies that you have helped roll out, and the Biden administration has been on, it's the first time I can remember it, where they've actually taken on the risk adjustment system in Medicare Advantage. And this is just the way that Medicare Advantage plans get paid. They say, okay, we think people have these conditions, and therefore we should get paid more to take care of them. And there's been a lot of gaming with that. And the Biden administration started to crack down on that because there's been instances of exaggerating a lot of these codes. Do you worry that some of the rules, like it's known as version 28, adjustments to Medicare Advantage could be rolled back? Because that was honestly one of the biggest changes within Medicare Advantage in decades, I think. or do you worry that that could get rolled back?
Well, I think ultimately, people in healthcare, you want healthcare to work for the people that you're serving. And that means that a healthcare market should compete on the things that matter to people. It should compete on quality. It should compete on outcomes. And so a lot of the changes that we made were with that in mind. You know, at the end of the day, health plans have to compete with each other. And what is the environment in which they are competing? And a lot of the feedback that we got, you know, we did a request for information when I first came in to get input from everyone. Got more than 4,000 comments, including
A lot of them angry.
Huh?
A lot of them angry, just about MA in general, about this situation.
No, I
in the
mean,
program.
I would say that it was a lot of like, here are things that are, you know, working. There are, you know, innovations in MA, and we need more data about what those innovations are so that we can know what is working, how can those be scaled and shared. And there was a lot around also like the marketing around, you know, where prior authorization is appropriate, because prior authorization is an appropriate tool, and making sure that it's being used in an appropriate way. And I think a lot of it comes back to fundamentals. I mean, I am a physician, I'm also a health economist, and for any of you who have taken Health Econ 101, we will not do a quiz right now, but, you know, healthcare markets are imperfect. You have imperfect information where you have the people who are the consumers not having the full information about exactly what it is that they need, yet they need to navigate and make choices. You have supply-induced demand, you have moral hazard. I mean, I can go through all of these, you know, terms. At the end of the day, how do you address those through a regulatory perspective so that you can make sure that competition is on what matters? And I think ultimately, for anybody who is working in healthcare, if you want to improve healthcare, it's about making sure that the markets are working in the best way possible to be able to deliver the care that people need so that we can improve care, we can improve outcomes, and we can spend the healthcare dollar in the smartest way possible.
You're about to jump in.
No,
Or not.
I mean,
I've-
so, I mean, Mina mentioned that healthcare markets are imperfect, and this is very true. And this isn't necessarily a CMS issue. This is also going to have to be a congressional issue to fix some of these things. Like, you just think about the No Surprises Act, where, like, who could possibly be against it, right? Like, I don't think any one of us should get this surprise bill from assistant surgeon who was out of network. But there's also glaring holes in this type of thing. Like, if you take an out-of-network ambulance, have fun, you might get a $500, $2,000, $3,000, $10,000 bill in the mail for something obviously you didn't order. So, like, what? Like, there are just, like, such common things that are still, like, just crushing people. And are there ways that the next administration could tackle this, or is this just strictly like we gotta just hope Congress conquers some of these imperfections? Because those types of things I think are on people's minds too.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as many of you know, there are the issues that are in statute and statutory authorities, right? Like, you know, Medicare is actually 3 levels, right? There's the statute, the Medicare law, that's at like the 50,000-foot level. That provides authorities that, you know, regulators can use for regulations at like the 25,000-foot level. And then you have how care actually plays out on the ground. And all 3 levels are important to what actually ends up transpiring on the ground with someone getting care. And I think sometimes it is hard for people to know which level is creating which problem or creating which solution. And I think that's something that, you know, there has to continue to be an effort to discuss and educate. Like, for example, I had people when I was, you know, head of Medicare telling me, you know, oh, like, you need to get this healthcare system to pay these particular providers differently. Well, as the head of Medicare, we are not going in and doing each negotiation, employment negotiation that occurs between, a clinician and a health system. That is something that happens, more with care on the ground. Or, where people said, there is the conversion factor in the physician fee schedule, and do something about that. Well, that is something that is in the Medicare law.
Welcome to budget neutrality, my friend. Right?
Let me, if in our closing minute or so, let me just ask you each a question to sort of look ahead. First of all, and let me start with Bob. Do you understand? You mentioned this at the outset, but do you understand the extraordinary sort of reckoning we're seeing in health insurance now, and the patient sort of unrest, the public unrest? And do you understand why that is? And do you feel optimistic or worried about the future?
Well, I think we understand that this has existed for a long time. A lot of it falls to out-of-pocket burden. We all feel like we're paying a lot more for health care at the point of care, when we get bills in the mail afterward. None of this is necessarily new. And this has kind of been a steady drag of, I'm guessing a lot of us have employer insurance here. Our employers have been raising deductibles over the years, so less gets taken out of our paycheck. This is the system that we've created, and oh, by the way, all of this is created because it's tax deductible. Employers want to keep offering their insurance. It's like none of this is new. Am I optimistic? I mean, are healthcare reporters optimistic? That's the question. I mean, I have no idea.
I'm not asking a judgment, but just based on your reporting, like, how does the outlook look to you?
I mean, it is catching people's attention. Look at the attention. Like Congress, you have antitrust agencies, you have state lawmakers, you have state legislators actually starting to get invested in a lot of these problems. The issue with so much of healthcare is a lot of it is a federal thing, and I mean a lot, for good or for worse, falls on CMS's shoulders, and that's sometimes unfair. But I think that's a lot harder, and Congress has a big part, and I mean, who knows?
I'm not seeing. I'm hearing who knows and not much positivity. Mina, what's your outlook for the future?
Well, I am optimistic, and you all could probably have guessed that, but I'm optimistic because I think dialogue is the most important thing that we can do. Anytime there's something very complex, nobody can solve it alone. And it is so important that there are conversations happening. And, I'll say I did an interview with Modern Healthcare recently, and they said, kind of what you said, Bob, like, you guys have made some of the biggest changes that have occurred in decades in 3.5 years. How did you do that? I said, I listened. Like, there's no pride in authorship in the things we did. They were ideas that came from people like you. And I think as long as there is that ability to continue that dialogue, we need to improve transparency, data. We need to have people speak in real language, in English, that others can understand. I mean, I'm not saying that we're there, but I think that there has been progress and improvements, and I think that's what needs to continue. And I'm optimistic that it will.
We will end on your optimistic note. Thank you both very much. Let me turn now to Matt.
All right, well, I just want to propose a toast to all of you. I don't know if we're still open, but I want to propose a toast to all of you for sticking this out and for staying. And your reward is, I guess, these closing remarks, but there's actually a little reward stuck in there. Thanks again for joining us, to all our speakers for taking the time to speak and share your expertise, and to our event sponsors for making this possible, to our presenting sponsor, Miram, and our supporting sponsor, Cencora. A note that we are hosting a co-working space for subscribers and guests here in this same space. You can work in this amazing space for the next 2 days from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Once registered, you have access to this. to work, take meetings, and network with fellow attendees. We have coffee and snacks throughout both days as well. The QR code on the screen here will lead you to the registration page. If you have any questions, feel free to stop by the STAT registration table and chat with one of our team members. That's reward number 1. Reward number 2, if you run into any approval process, mention that you stayed till the end here. The STAT Breakthrough Summit East is returning to New York City on March 20th. If you liked this, you'll love that. STAT will be sitting down with industry experts, including gene therapy pioneer Jim Wilson, Included Health CEO Owen Tripp, and Rose CEO Zach Reitano. Zach and Owen are going to debate about the best way to do telehealth. Early bird pricing is available through January 16th. We will take you through the whole course of a drug's path to market. Be sure to check out our website for ticketing information. The STATS Breakthrough Summit West is returning to San Francisco, right here if you live here, this year on May 14th. We will be exploring the impact of AI and emerging tech on healthcare, mostly AI. Speakers include Reed Jobs and Aviv Regev of Genentech. Tickets are now available on our website at our lowest super early access rates until January 21st, so sign up this week. Thank you very, very much for being here. Thank you very, very much for staying. Have a great JP Morgan. I'm going to have my wine now.